All right, welcome in. It's the Breer Report for June the 12th. We are wrapping up minicamp week here. The offseason is about to screech to a halt, and the NFL is about to go on a break. There are some teams that have their offseason programs lingering into next week. The Rams have their minicamp in Hawaii. But for the most part, we are just about to the summer for NFL purposes, where things shut down for a little while before ramping up right there in mid to late July with the start of training camp. So I wanted to get to a few of your questions here. As always, you can get to more of our questions and more of our answers on the mmqb.com. The print mailbag is up there now. We are going to get to three of your questions right here, right now. First question coming from Just Football. That's at Just the Start Zero. He asked, what's the likelihood the Steelers re-sign TJ Watt versus trade Watt? And if they sign him, how many millions? Okay, so Just Football. I would say right now, there's a very, very, very low possibility that TJ Watt is not a Steeler in 2025. And I'd say a high probability that he is a Steeler on a new contract. It's just where the team is right now. They went out and got Aaron Rodgers because they have a core that they believe they can win a championship with absent a quarterback. They obviously missed in 2022 in drafting Kenny Pickett. They tried to duct tape it together last year with Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. That only got them so far. They did get to the playoffs, but they didn't get out of the first round. And now they want to try to give that core of players the best shot possible to try and pursue a championship now before those guys start to age out. So to me, it would make no sense to sign Aaron Rodgers and then turn around and go to war with TJ Watt and even consider moving him out of town. My feeling right now is that they will get something done probably before the start of training camp. But even if it's not before the start of training camp, we saw this 4 years ago, the way that thing kind of lingered and festered, and they wind up getting something done at the end. One way or the other, I think this is going to be done. One way or the other, I think TJ Watt is going to be ready to roll and have a great year and ready to have a great year in 2025. He's played in all 17 games the last 2 years. Some of the previous injury concerns aren't what they were maybe when he was 28. And he's had 30 and a half sacks the last 2 years. Not the strongest finish last year, but that goes for the whole team. And I do think that there's a little bit of a market parameter out there for him. Not what Myles Garrett got, but if you look at the older third contract guys, both Danielle Hunter and Max Crosby are in the mid-30s. I think they'll be able to figure something out. They've got $21 million due this year, so that'll allow them to fold a lower number into an extension, which will allow them to manage the numbers a little bit more effectively. It makes too much sense for them to find a way to get something done. I think they get something done that at least sets them up to have the opportunity to retire as a Steeler. Obviously, those things are always a moving target. Hard to say whether or not he will retire a Steeler, but I think they will get something done. Question number 2, this is from Danger Zone. That's at Danger Zone. Any insight as to what Joe Douglas had planned with the Jet extensions, which would have been a focal point had he stayed? I'm curious if anyone has asked him, especially when it comes to guys like Brees and ABT. So Danger Zone, I would say I would put this in a couple buckets. I think the first bucket is the guys who absolutely are part of the team's future, whether they get done now or negotiations go a little sideways and it has to wait for a little bit. I'd put Garrett Wilson in that category. I'd put Sauce Gardner in that category. I think there's a chance that one or both get done before the start of training camp, but I think those two guys are Jets to stay. I would look at Ollie Vera Tucker as somebody they would explore an extension with. I think Breece Hall's another one where, you look at it and you make a fair offer. With guards, it can be a little bit more difficult because those guys have a little bit more of a freeway to free agency in that you have to tag them at a tackle number, which is a little bit more difficult. That's why those guys make it to the market more often. And backs are always hard to value. So I'd say those are guys where, if it were Joe Douglas, he probably takes a swing at getting those guys done. And maybe it's 50-50. And then you have Jermaine Johnson, who I think is a really interesting one where, I think you look at him and you probably wait a year. You've got some flexibility with him. I just look at Jermaine Johnson as kind of the one where it's, because of the injury history now, because, you have seen flashes, you want to keep working with him. but you probably wait a year. And I think it underscores that there's a pretty good core that Joe Douglas left in place there. Obviously, he deserves plenty of criticism for not getting him to the playoffs over 6 years there. And, the quarterback situation, that big swing and miss on Zach Wilson, that's on his record too. But, you look at the core that Darren Muji and Aaron Glenn are inheriting. It's a pretty good core. It's a core that I think should be very competitive, if not compete for a playoff spot in 2025. And I think right now, I'd say that they have the second most talented roster in the AFC East, behind, of course, the 5-time defending AFC East champion Buffalo Bills. Finally, question number 3 from Obed Gonzalez. That's at OOG713. Do you have any concern of the Texas offensive line? A bunch of unknowns. Obed, the answer is absolutely, positively, yes, I have concerns. I think there's one player we can look at and say, like, that guy's going to be a solid starter for them somewhere. That's Titus Howard. Right now, they have him teed up to be the right guard. I think he could also wind up playing tackle. But there are a ton of questions all over the place. Jake Andrews is somebody they brought in. Juice Scruggs has been playing some at guard now after playing center early in his career. And then at tackle, you have a whole bunch of unknowns. You've got Ursary from Minnesota, who you drafted in the second round. There were some character questions with him, but he's very talented. You bring in Trent Brown. You bring in Cam Robinson. I don't know if I'd call those guys reclamation projects, but certainly there are questions that come with those guys. Blake Fisher, you drafted him last year. You have, in total, you add the whole thing up, I think about 10 offensive linemen competing for 5 spots. You don't know for sure who's going to start in any one of those spots. If you have 10 offensive linemen, do you have 5 starters? I think it's a fair question to ask. And, obviously a lot now is going to be on the revamped coaching staff to make this work. Nick Caley comes in from Los Angeles. And then Cole Popovich, who was with Nick Caley for a half decade in New England, is promoted from assistant O-line coach to the head coach of the offensive line, I guess you could call him. So on Popovich, on Caley, there's a lot of pressure to get those 5 positions right, because I think it's the one position on that team that could hold them back. I think everywhere else, that Texans team is pretty good. Like, I really like where they are going into 2025. The one thing that could undermine them, of course, is that offensive line. And so Popovich, Caley got to get it right. And obviously with Laramie Tunsil going out the door and a little bit of a culture makeover happening in that room, there's a lot of unknown. Appreciate you guys coming out. As always, love your feedback. We'll take your feedback at Albert Breer on Twitter, at Albert R. Breer on Facebook, at Albert_Breer on Instagram. We will keep coming to you until I go on vacation with these Breer reports over the next couple of weeks. As always, keep sending your questions in. We'll do another mailbag next week, and we'll have another Breer report at the beginning of the week. We'll see you guys then.